Bill Black has been entertaining audiences for over 50 years. Founder of AC Comics, one of the longest-running independent publishers around, he has created such characters as Femforce and the Scarlet Scorpion. As a filmmaker under Night Vale Media, he has made several films based on his comic characters. A lifelong fan of monster movies, Bill has also made several retro-style monster and sci-fi films. Bill Black was born on September 14, 1943, to parents John and Gail Schwartz. As a child, he grew up in the town of Tarentum, Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. From an early age, he developed his love for comics and movies.
I developed an interest in comics, I guess around age 6. I lived in a small steel town in Pennsylvania called Tarentum, which was 20 miles east of Pittsburgh. And in that environment, all of us kids collected comic books. We always went to the newsstand. You know, we knew when the new comics would come out, and we were always there. And it was just part of our life. Before cosplay, we dressed up as our favorite comic book heroes, and we had a kind of a ritual where every Saturday we'd get our allowance, and then we would go to the movies and see, like you see pictured here, like Roy Rogers and various cowboy movies, and they'd run a serial. And then afterwards, I don't know what they did, but I always went to the newsstand and would see what the latest comic books were that came in. So I'd say I started actively collecting comics at age 6. And I mean, I did collect them. I never threw them out. My parents would have loved for me to throw them out. It meant a lot to us, but it didn't mean so much to the adults. Yet, I'll have to say, every household I went into, except for my great uncle, every household in that town had comic books in it.
In addition to reading and collecting comics, Bill started to take an interest in art and drawing.
I started my art career in the 2nd grade when there was a little girl that I thought was very beautiful. Her name was Karen Love. How's that, huh? She drew horses. So in order to get in good with her, I tried drawing, of course, horses way beyond, but that was my first attempt at comics, but I never thought of it or art as a career. Later on, after I'd moved to Florida and I was in the 6th grade, I got in a drawing competition with my fellow classmates. A guy, I'm not making this up, his name was Bobby Hunkapiller. He was from Louisiana, and he would draw period pirate stories and make them as comic books. So I started drawing my own comic books. His was LA Comics for Louisiana, and mine was PA because I was in Pennsylvania. And my first comic book character that I drew was again a time from the movies, was the Black Commando. And they had re-released the 1942 Columbia serial, The Secret Code, in the early 50s, and I saw that in the theaters, and that starred a masked character called the Black Commando. And he was the first comic book character that I ever drew, and that started me on my drawing career. And the reason I continued drawing after that competition in the 6th grade was, as comics were canceled, I would try to draw my own version to keep it going.
Bill and his family relocated to Central Florida in 1951. Landing in Winter Park. Bill found the comic and movie scene in Florida to be much different from his former home of Pennsylvania. Eventually, Bill was able to find someone that shared his interests, and this opened up new opportunities.
Up north, everybody was into comics and went to the movies. Down when I moved to Winter Park, I was a mile and a half away from the nearest movie theater, whereas in Pennsylvania I could walk to it. So it was an ordeal, but it was a ritual I did every week. And there were a lot of us that went to the theater in Winter Park. They would have yo-yo contests and stuff like that, so some of my classmates would gather to that. But I was the only one that, when the monster movie craze came, I was the only one that went to those. And I would have to then take a bus from Winter Park into Orlando to see those movies downtown. From the 3rd grade to the 12th grade, I only met one other guy that actively collected comic books like I did. And one day I was in art class. I would have been, I guess, in my senior year. And this transfer student comes in. He transferred down from Washington, D.C. And he walks into class and he has a folded up copy of Famous Monsters of Filmland in his back pocket. So I said, Brother Rat. I mean, even more obscure than liking comic books. It was obscure to like monster movies. So his name was Jim Cacavo, and he was a fellow artist, and his father was actually a cinematographer in the Air Force, and there was Orlando Air Force Base, and that's why he moved to Winter Park. So he had interest in filmmaking and interest in comics. And we worked together, usually with him in front of the camera and me behind the camera, although sometimes we were both in front of the camera.
Motivated by his love for monster movies and knowing a few like-minded people, Bill acquired a camera and began to work on making films.
When I was in high school, I got a used 8mm movie camera. I never had in my entire life, to this day, had two nickels to rub together. So home movies was a popular thing in families. Everybody had a home movie camera. My family didn't. So I went to a camera store in Winter Park and found a used camera that was within my price range. And I wanted to make black and white movies because the movies I would see in the theater, the monster movies, are all in black and white. There are very few that were ever done in color. So I want to emulate that. So you couldn't buy black and white film locally. You had to mail order it.
With the ability to shoot movies in black and white the way he envisioned it, Bill started the process of making his first movie.
I think the first one was Invasion of the Vargan, and I made a monster head out of paper mache, and he kind of looked like the monsters in I Married a Monster from Outer Space. That impressed me. There was really neat makeup on that, but it wasn't like applied to his face. It was a headpiece that went over his head. And I guess my mother helped me. We made a black bodysuit for him, and we shot that. And we got a couple of girls that we thought were hot from my high school class, and we filmed a couple scenes. Then we sent the film off to get it processed, and when it comes back, it's just worthless. It's terrible. It's all either overexposed or underexposed. It's worthless. So we had to give up on doing the black and white stuff.
Always looking for new innovations to his filmmaking, Bill worked to improve the look of his monsters. This led to a pleasant surprise.
I really love monster movies. Monster movies were my life, and the only connection I had with monster movies was Forrest J. Ackerman's magazine, Famous Monsters of Filmland. And he was running a contest in Famous Monsters. If you make up your own monster, and if you become a finalist and are the winner, you get to play a part in an American International horror movie, which at this time would have been a Vincent Price movie. Wow, what an incentive that was. So I didn't want to do a traditional monster. I wanted to do something unique. And also I was already making my own amateur movies at the time. So we made this movie, or I made the monster for this movie, the creature from Galaxy 27. And he was a humanoid monster, but his head was all wacky. It was like orange, and he had fin ears, and he had a single eye in the middle, which was made from an egg. You knock a hole in an egg and you flow the yolk out of it, and then you let it dry out, and then you paint an iris and pupil on it and put it in the head. He had an eye. And I wanted to make him different than humans. So I had the socket of the eye had hair in it, and in the mouth had hair in it, and he had, fangs up and down in it. So that was Solopticus. I had to have a name for him for the magazine, so we called him Solopticus, and we never used the name in the movie. So I took pictures of Solopticus and sent it in, and lo and behold, I became one of the 10 finalists. I didn't win, but I was there with like 9 other guys, and in Famous Monsters number 18, they got a picture of me and a picture of the monster.
Being a low-budget filmmaker, Bill had to find creative ways to add special effects to his films.
How I did my effects were, I was very fascinated by miniature sets. And so I built as many as I could muster. And my parents were long suffering. To emulate a cave, I would get butcher paper, which was brown, and I'd wad it all up so it had different angles in it. Then I would masking tape it to the walls in my house, and then I would put the camera on a tripod at the other end of the corridor and turn it on, and then I would go down to the other end and walk through the scene. So that was one version of a practical set. And then I built a really tiny little spaceship cockpit on my carport where we just took a piece of masonite and spray painted it silver, and I got some old radio tubes and stuff and made a little view screen, and that was the Vargan spaceship.
Bill continued making movies throughout high school, deriving inspirations for scripts from movies of the era.
The ideas for the movies would almost always center around the monster. I like to make monsters, and we'd make a monster, then I'd come up with a story around that. And I knew my limitations, so it would always involve high school kids, pretty much. Creature from the Galaxy 27, Kakavo and I, although we were in high school, we were supposedly our government agents in that. And we got my dad to be in it, so we would have a contrast of, someone older. But most of the other movies dealt with, I suppose it would be inspired by The Blob. The Blob was made in '58, and Steve McQueen was playing a high school student in that, even though he was in his 20s. But I always thought that was a good example of how teenagers should act. The movies that I made, it would be like a spaceship would land and the monster would come out, or a meteor would crash and the monster would come out. Somehow we get the monster out, and then he would be attacking Winter Park, shooting down death rays and blowing up the Colony movie theater and stuff like that. But it always centered around the monsters, and I would handwrite the scripts.
Ready to get back to filmmaking, Bill started production on his movie Black Mass.
Kakavo was a Catholic, and we wanted to point out the ludicrousness of the Catholic Church, okay? And so he was all for that. So he played the priest in the movie, and he made the collar up and wore the black suit and all that. And I forgot who I played, but I was the guy whose girlfriend was kidnapped by the cultists, and they were going to sacrifice her in a black mass ceremony. And that ceremony would be the cutting out of her heart. And I was going to Orlando Junior College at that time, and there was a character there, a fellow student. He was 15 years older than me, so he was like in midlife going back to school. And he was this Weasley little, I guess you'd call him a rat-faced like guy. He had a close-cropped goatee, and he had teeth almost kind of like a rat, right? And we thought, God, this guy would be great as the villain in our Black Mass movie. He can be the head cult leader. And so we talked him into it, and he was all for it. He was a real nervous kind of a guy, and it turns out he was an artist. He's a really fantastic artist, and he did paintings in miniature that were just breathtaking. And he did work for me later on when I started Paragon Publications. He did some illustrations. But this was our first experience with F. Stuart Smith, okay? So we make this movie, and what he did while we were filming the scene ruined the plot of the movie and destroyed forever my relationship with my girlfriend, and that's all I'm going to say about it, okay? And the sad, cruel thing about this is that I lost Kathy, but I gained F. Stuart Smith as kind of a lifelong friend. So we had to change the ending of that movie, and it became a very pessimistic movie, and that good didn't triumph over evil, evil didn't triumph over good. Everybody dies at the end of this movie. Everybody dies. So Kathy didn't get saved. She got her heart cut out, and my heart was cut out too.
After finishing high school, Bill took the next step and signed up to attend college at Florida State University.
I went to FSU because it was recommended to me by my high school art teacher, who was Mrs. Winslow, and she also lived down the street from me on the same street I lived on in Winter Park. So I knew her all my life in Florida, and I respected her. And she said that Florida State was a good school for art. University of Florida, Central Florida didn't exist then, and the only other choice was University of Florida.
Because at the time there was no film school at Florida State, Bill was free to do the type of movies he wanted.
I got to do a lot of movies at Florida State on my own because there was no film school there. And also I did a lot in art because I got up with a Renegade magazine publisher who I met at off campus at Florida State.
With the help of a local renegade independent magazine publisher, Bill had an outlet for his artistic talents and ambition.
Every university or college has their own magazine, and it's usually a humor magazine where they make fun of the administration. They had one at Florida State, and I can't even remember the name of it now, but of course you're under the auspices of the faculty, and you can't get too outrageous or they bring the axe down on you. The Charlatan was a renegade college humor magazine that was published and edited by Bill Killeen, who was a former student at the University of Texas. And at the University of Texas, he and a cartoonist named Gilbert Shelton created a character for the U of T magazine called Wonder Warthog. Wonder Warthog has gone on to become very famous. And but at this time, this was the beginning of Wonder Warthog. So it was Wonder Warthog, which was a parody of a superhero, which was a comic strip, which got me interested in the Charlatan, which got me up with Killeen. Now, he would set up little card tables in front of like the bookstore across the street from the university. He wasn't allowed physically on the campus, but he could set up across the street at the sweet shop or the bookstore, and he would peddle his magazines. He'd have a big stack of them, and they were 50 cents a piece back then. Okay, so I explained to him who I was and that I was a cartoonist and all this kind of stuff, and I asked if he needed art. Mostly he was getting art by cutting cartoons out of other magazines and pasting them up. So I came to work for him as a cartoonist and eventually became the associate editor. And we had a lot of adventures with the Charlatan, which was not limited by any faculty administration whatsoever. And we were able to become popular by putting down Dean Hale at the University of Florida and all the Florida State deans and all that. Anything that the kids hated, we would put in there and they'd love it and they'd buy the magazine. And we sold ads to the local businesses, the pizza joints and all that. And I would do illustrations for the ads that would go in the magazine. And we did some of the covers. I never got to do a Wonder Warthog strip, but I did get to draw him on the cover.
While working for the Charlatan, Bill became a part of history and controversy as the magazine set out to try something that had not been done before.
Also, in the thing that gave the Charlatan, okay, every year there would be a voting on what's the best college humor magazine in America. And for a couple years in a row, even though it was not associated with an actual university or college, the Charlatan won. And we got to have the tagline, America's #1 humor magazine. That was under the masthead in the book. Also, all these magazines would have a pinup girl in it, and they would get some co-ed at whatever university, and they'd photograph her in a skimpy outfit or a bathing suit. And since we couldn't call her the Girl of the Month like Playboy because it came out irregularly, she was called the Feature Girl. So there was a sense of propriety in that there was no nudity, and that there had never been any nudity in any college humor magazine. So of course Killeen had to strike out against the world to have the first naked co-ed centerfold in a college humor magazine. And this young lady's name was Pam Brewer, and she had all the necessary equipment, and she was quite nice looking, and she became the feature girl in an issue of Charlatan. And when it came out that she was laid out in the middle, completely naked, this got on the news everywhere. I mean, not just in Tallahassee, everywhere, all around the country, maybe even around the world.
While at Florida State, Bill and a friend came up with a script for Carnage of Dracula. Bill, wanting to change the look of his movie, decided to shoot it in a different format.
I had been shooting movies in 8mm, and the goal would be someday to be able to do a sound movie, and you'd have to go to 16mm. It's a very complicated and expensive system, unlike today's telephone or cell phone or camcorder where everything is combined into one unit. You had to have all kinds of ancillary equipment to do a sound movie. But I wanted to see if I could, I had a movie coming up. I wanted to do a Dracula movie. I was living off campus, and one of my roommates was an actor, or professed to be an actor, and he wanted to be Dracula, and he had his own Dracula cape and his fangs and everything. So we went together and decided we were going to write a script, and he wrote most of it, and we were going to do a movie, which we came to call Carnage of Dracula. And I wanted to try to shoot this in 16 millimeter. And I know that sporting events at Florida State were filmed in 16 millimeter because there was no camcorders back in those days. So I found out who the man was that did this at Florida State, and I went to his office to talk to him about the possibility of borrowing a camera to shoot my monster movies.
While trying to gain permission to shoot the film on campus, Bill found himself in a heated confrontation with one of the members of the faculty.
The only thing I knew about this guy was that he was a German immigrant who had become an American citizen, but it was rumored that he had been a Luftwaffe pilot during World War II, and in the last days of the war, Hitler was putting teenagers in cockpits, because they were running out of men. So it's possible that this guy was that. But anyways, when I approached him on the subject, he blew his top. He literally hit the ceiling, and he started ranting and raving and cussing and swearing and shaking his fist at me. Under no circumstances would anybody film any movies at Florida State University except him. He was the only man who was authorized to do it. No one would ever do it. No one can ever shoot any film on this campus except me. And he was dropping the F-bomb right and left, and I couldn't believe it because this guy was in the administration. Back in those days, even us college guys, we didn't swear all that much. And here it was unheard of that, a person of authority in a university was effing me right and left. And I was literally shocked. And he, threw me out of his office. And I was numb. It was on the second floor of a building. On the inside of the building, it had like an atrium, an open space, and his office was on the second floor and had a balcony on it, and you could look down into the atrium. And I stood out in front of his office, and he slammed the door on me. And it took me a couple minutes to regain my senses from the assault.
Discouraged after the confrontation, Bill found new inspiration, and the Carnage of Dracula once again took off when he discovered a location right around the corner.
And I started looking around this building and the architecture, and this thing must have been built back 1920s or earlier than that. And it had this old European architecture, and I thought, well, this would be a great place to film a Dracula movie because the inside of this building looks like it could be Dracula's castle. And so I walked around, and I went, the more I looked, the more I saw that I liked. It had some things like cast iron guardrails on the steps, but other than that, it probably could pass as a Dracula castle. So I made up my mind I was going to film my Dracula movie in this building. Screw this guy, I didn't have his camera, but I had my own camera, so we were going to do this. So I would have to do it on the weekend, and so I went to the building on Saturday and Sunday to check what was going on in the building, and there was nobody there, and no one ever locked the building. And I would walk up the stairs and go all through the building, and I didn't find another living being in the building. So I thought, okay, we can make a go of this.
Bill, who at the time was not a student at FSU, decided to move forward with the on-campus location. He and his team got to work putting together a cast and setting up the shoot.
So my roommate, Mike, he lined up actors from the Tallahassee Little Theater. And this is the first time I worked with actors who were older than people my own age. We had people in their 30s and 40s, real old people in it. And he lined up a couple of gals. One would be the vampire gal, one would be the victim, and one guy would be the scientist guy. And one guy would be the boyfriend of the girl going to rescue her who gets a stake driven through his heart. And then Mike, of course, would be Dracula, although we didn't use the name Dracula in the movie. He was Baron Lorbach. I was on a trimester system, and I was not actually a student at Florida State at the time. So when I was recounting this to myself, I thought how impossible the whole situation was. I was living in Winter Park. That's a 4-hour drive to Tallahassee. Up in Tallahassee, my roommate, Mike McGowan, is gathering up these actors. And we're going to converge on this building. I wish I could remember the name of it, to shoot this movie. And it had to be on a Sunday, I guess. So I guess I drove 4 hours, must have left before dawn or something. And we get up there and we don't know what we're going to find. But the building is unlocked and we go in. And we go in carrying a coffin, carrying a fold-up cot to simulate a hospital bed, one of those blood plasma stands, with the hook on it and the container of blood on that, and the stake to stake people out in the makeup. And we have a cast of 5 plus me, who's the director and cameraman, and we had a makeup artist. So all this, we go into this building on the Florida State campus. Nobody's there. Nobody sees us. Nobody cares. We must have shot, I would say, 8 hours in order to get this done.
As the campus was empty on weekends, the shooting of Carnage was a little less risky. Bill and his team started the actual shooting of the film.
We had different parts of that building set up as different locations even. So we had the main character, he was out running through the exterior of the building, chasing the vampire. The vampire run by, and the guy come after him with the stake in his hand. And eventually we went into this building, and we had to do things like make the vampire girl age. So we had to put the embalmer's wax on her face to make her look all creepy. So that took time. And then the main guy, we had to drive the stake through his heart. So we put him in the coffin. We had this fake stake, and it was taped to his chest. And we had a different shirt where we had a slit in it and the stake sticking out of it. And then we had to put the blood all around it and all that. So it was a full-scale deal. And like I said, we had a makeup guy doing it, and we took still shots and shot it all on 8mm, which it was quite a production for doing it in 8mm. It was a silly thing. And we had the lights, all the lights. And I tried to light it like a Hammer movie. So we would have the lights just off to the side of the camera and plug it into the wall at the building. And away we go. So we got away with it. And when it was done, then we went to one of the guys' house and we shot some rear screen stuff where we had the characters sitting in a Volkswagen, and we put a translucent screen over the back windshield, and then we projected with an 8mm projector the scene of driving, looking what we see driving from behind a car there. That didn't work out very well. I think we cut that from the movie. But we got all this done like in one day, and I guess I drove back to Tallahassee, or back to Winter Park the next day.
After shooting, Bill got to work editing the film. During a trip back home with his father, Bill was able to get a little publicity for the movie.
So editing it came together pretty good, and it looked good. And because we had real actors in it, it was fairly convincing. And I was proud of it, and it was obviously the best movie I'd made to date. And like I said, I was off of school that time, and I put this together. And my dad and I took a trip back to our hometown in Pennsylvania, where he knew the guys that worked on the town newspaper. And he told them about what I was doing, and they wrote a little article about it for the school paper. And I had with me the negatives that I shot of making of Carnage of Dracula. And his buddy there took him into the photo lab of the newspaper, and he printed me up a whole bunch of 8x10 glossies, from the movie. That was really impressive.
Through George Odom, Bill was introduced to a producer, Robert Carlson, who seemed more interested in investing money than the film itself.
I found out that there was a movie producer who had a business in downtown Winter Park. And as it turned out, his name was Robert Carson, and he was the father of a guy I had gone to high school with. I didn't know him in high school. He was a underclassman. But anyways, that was kind of a link. So I guess through George Odom, I made contact with Robert Carson. And I took Carnage of Dracula with my 8mm movie projector, and I met with him in his just off of Park Avenue office in Winter Park to show him Carnage of Dracula. So Robert Carson and Guy Del Russo sat down and sat through my Carnage of Dracula. And I think more than what they liked about the movie, see, this is running through my head. What if they did this movie? Would I be the director? How would I direct cameramen with real cameras and stuff. I don't know anything about this stuff. I mean, I was very unsure of myself. But the fact that I mentioned that a friend of my father's was going to put $20,000 into it, as soon as they heard that, they were my buddies for life, okay? I mean, and so the wheels started turning like, okay, a fool and his money are soon parted, and I'm the guy sitting there with the dunce cap on, and they're just licking their chops over the 20 grand I have, and I can see 20 grand being invested in this and never a movie being made, and hey, good luck next time, kid. So it was part I was a coward, and part I felt I was being scammed. I never went any further with that, but I went back and finished my career at Florida State, and then immediately got drafted after that. But at that time, Carnage of Dracula was my crowning achievement, and it almost got made into kind of a real movie if I wasn't being fleeced.
Feeling that Carlson was not on the up and up, Bill passed on working with him and returned to Florida State to finish college. Almost immediately following college, Bill's next journey began.
As soon as I graduated from Florida State in 1966, I got my papers from Uncle Sam. I had to report for active duty April 19th. And every day between Christmas 66 and April 19th, I tried to figure out a way to get out of it, but I couldn't. And I went. And if you're in the Army, you're at the mercy of what the Army wants you to do. You don't have any say, particularly when you go in as a buck private. And this is where I noticed that I had acquired something which I've come to call strange luck, because circumstances that happened to me during my Army career benefited me greatly under overwhelming odds. I mean, 1967 was the absolute peak of the Vietnam War, and it was my fear that I would be sent to Vietnam, where I would either have to kill somebody or be killed myself.
On April 19th, 1967, Bill reported for duty with the U.S. military. Despite efforts to get him to go to officers training, with a little bit of strange luck, he was given his next assignment.
They called me out, and I had to go to interview to get my MOS, which is method of service. Every GI is assigned a method of service, which means what you're going to do when you're in the Army. You could be an auto mechanic, you could be a photographer, or, whatever else, a clerk, which is what this guy was. So I got out of the gas chamber to go to this, and they also were always trying to get me to, because I had a degree, to sign up for officers training school, OCS, and I wouldn't do that because if you're an officer, you had to serve 3 years instead of 2, and I wasn't going to give up another year of my life. So the guy that's interviewing me, when he finds out I'm an artist, turns out he is an artist. And he's very disgruntled because obviously he's not an artist in the Army. He's working as a clerk. He's interviewing jerks all day long about and assigning them what their fate's going to be for the next 2 or 4 years. So I guess he took pity on me, and he gave me the MOS of an illustrator. Now, this almost never happens, that you're actually given a method of service in something that you're good at.
While in basic training, Bill found he was not a fan of the drill instructors and found a way to make some extra money doing what he loved.
So anyways, during basic training, I did a lot of things that made people mad at me. Of course, if you're known as an artist and there's career military men around you, you're a pansy ass. They don't want to have anything to do with you. In the barracks, the guys, when they found out I was an artist, hey, can you draw a picture of my girlfriend? So I did this, and you're paid something like $75 a month when you start off in the Army. So I made a little extra coin by doing sketches of guys' girlfriends. One guy even had me draw his mother. And this just pissed off the drill instructors. They just really hated that.
After boot camp, Bill's strange luck continued as he was given his first assignment and then quickly moved somewhere more fitting of his skills.
So when I get out of the basic training in Fort Benning, also in Georgia, I get papers to go to Fort Stewart, which is the Army base that's closest to Florida. And at this time, I'm dating the girl who's going to be my future wife, and she's a grad student at Florida State. And it's within driving distance to go visit her in her home in Jacksonville or at Florida State in Tallahassee. So I report to duty as an illustrator, and they put me in a place called range control. I didn't understand what that was, but there are guys that draw maps. Fort Stewart is this huge area. It's like 50 miles across, and it's where they train for firing cannons and military big artillery pieces and stuff like that. And they have to have maps and stuff of the ranges. And so that's what they wanted me to do. Well, it was an art job, but it was like what you would do in a mechanical drawing class in high school. The guy whose place I was taking, he saw my art and he realized I had abilities that went beyond what they needed there. So he got me transferred to, and this is amazing, this never happens, to a guy who ran training aids on post. And his name was Mr. King. He was a civilian, and he had 2 other civilian artists working for him. I was the only GI there. And he set me up, and I was drawing things for the commanding officer and for different things that needed to be done through training aids, which is real illustrations. I got to do cartoons and drew tanks, stuff like that.
While working for training aids, Bill's boss let him use the facilities after hours for his personal artwork.
So while I was there, Mr. King, who was a very nice man, took pity on me, and I asked him if, I like to draw when I'm not on duty. He gave me a key to the place so I could come in at night, and I had access to the drawing table and, all the equipment and stuff that was in training aids, and I came in at night and did that. And it was there that I drew like a 7-page story that I submitted to Warren Publications to try to get a job when I got out of the Army as an artist doing horror stories for Creepy and Eerie magazine, which is had just started about 64, I think. And that actually came to pass. After I got out of the Army, Bill Parenti, the editor there, hired me there, and that was my first professional job. So again, this is very unusual.
While working on training aids, Bill was presented with the opportunity to work for Special Services.
There was another sergeant on the base, we'll just call him the Sarge, who came to see me all the time and he had me draw stuff. He wanted me to transfer out of training aids, which was a plush position, to go to work for him in Special Services. Now, his Special Services was not the Special Services where you jump out of airplanes into combat zones. This was, he did playing dances and gigs, ran movies and stuff for the dependents, the wives and children of the enlisted people on the base. So he wanted me to come over there to do posters. Now, I went over to his facility and I saw what he had, and I met a guy there who was a brother rat. He had liquid projectors and strobe lights, and I thought, whoa. The thing I really hated about going into the Army in 1967 is that the art world was exploding. Peter Max, and you had Haight-Ashbury, you had all the great poster art for all the rock bands and stuff. It was an artist's dream. Everything was just fabulous, and I was being taken away from that and locked up away from that for 2 years.
One day while Bill was visiting a friend in Jacksonville, he had a chance meeting with the person who would later become his wife.
I had a friend who lived on College, the main street that led into the university. He was off campus. And I would go to his place to visit him, and I would put my bicycle behind the bushes in his front yard so no one would steal the bike. And one day I was doing just that when I met this young lady coming out of the bushes as I was going into the bushes. And this was Rebecca, a very attractive young lady. She was a grad student at the time. And I was immediately attracted to her because in my twisted mind, I said the long dark hair down to her shoulders. And I said, she kind of looks like Barbara Steele. Whoa. So I started talking her up, and I noticed that she had a big portfolio under her arm. So I thought, wow, she's good looking and she's an artist. And I found out she was a grad student at Florida State in interior design. And these were sketches that she did for her design classes. So that's how we met.
As Bill was making plans to get married, he was given orders to ship off to Germany. This move would have made him miss his wedding. But once again, his strange luck came into play, and he was able to stay stateside. While
I was working at training aids, I got orders cut on me that I was going to Germany. And in the meantime, my romance with my wife-to-be Rebecca, had gotten to the point where we were engaged, and we were going to get married on June 15th in Jacksonville, Florida. My orders were to send me like June 10th to Germany, so I'd missed my own wedding. So I'm pissing and moaning about that. I didn't want to do that, but I was very glad that, you know, if you're only in for 2 years and you get sent to Germany, there's no odds that you're going to also be sent after your hitch of duty in Germany. There's not going to be enough time left to do a tour in Vietnam. So my neck was safe from that point on. But I didn't want to do it because I really wanted to get married. So in the barracks, I'm in a room with 7 other guys, 5 guys in a room. One of the guys worked in the headquarters company, POR and levy section. And he came up to me one day and he said, I pulled your files that had your orders to go to Germany. I pulled them out of the filing cabinet and took them and dropped them behind the filing cabinet. So you don't have to worry about going to Germany. You can go ahead and get married. Sounded good to me. So when the Sarge found out about this, he said, what we're going to do is you're going to sign out from Mr. King at Training Aids, and you're going to come over and work for me, and I'll get you set up over there doing that. So that's what we did. So I bid a tearful adieu to Mr. King and all the nice people. He was so nice to me there. I hated to deceive him like that, but I also wanted to get married. So I just walked over the other side of the post and started working for Training Aids. For the Special Services.
Now working for Special Services, Bill settled into his new assignment.
And John Gilmore set me up teaching photography, teaching painting. We had our own painting studio with all these easels, all the big enlarges and stuff in the darkroom. We had all this, the government paid for it. Hired my wife, Rebecca, as the secretary. She ran, she administrated the duties of the craft shop. There was a gallery in front of it where they hung my paintings.
Being in the Army didn't stop Bill from pursuing his love of making movies.
We also made a lot of movies while I was in the Army. And one that we made, it was called The Pod. And it was about a 6-foot-long slug, I guess you'd call it, like if you could imagine a snail without the shell on the back. And we did another movie called The Pallid Mask, which is based on a series of short stories in a book called The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. I was fascinated by that book in that it was a series of short stories about a fictional book called The King in Yellow. And if anybody ever read the book, The King in Yellow, it drove them insane. So making a movie about people reading this book and going insane fit in with my way of making movies and the Fellini-esque surreal nature of it. And so we had a lot of fun with that.
Bill, now comfortable in his role at Special Services, found himself once again being transferred to another assignment.
I had been transferred out of headquarters company to a automotive mechanic company because they had to have a certain number of people under this auspices. Even though I wasn't working in the motor pool, I was there, but I was there on their books only. I went to roll call once a month, or I had to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning. They called my name. I said, here. And that was it. Then I went back. That was the only time I wore a uniform, was for that hour that I did roll call once a month. I wore civilian clothes. I taught photography. I taught painting. We made movies. John Gilmore and I made movies together. And that ultimately led to the creation of my publishing career.
Toward the end of his time in the Army, Bill, looking to start a fanzine, convinced his bosses to buy a printing press and started what would become Paragon Publications.
So I had learned about fanzines by answering ads in the back of Marvel Comics and ordered some fanzines. And I learned that there was a place you could market your cartoons and comic strips other than through Marvel and DC, which were pretty much the only publishing company. So I decided I would do my own, print my own publications. So literally the last week or so I had in the Army before I went out, John asked me what we wanted to spend all this money we had left over on. First words out of my mouth were printing press. So we drove into Savannah and we bought We went to the A.B. Dick Company. We bought a printing press. We bought the camera to shoot the negatives, the processing stuff, all the ink and the paper and all this kind of stuff. And I had, at training aids under Mr. King, I had drawn this, what if the Golden Age Captain Marvel had been brought back in Marvel comics of today? You know, where Stan Lee was creating Peter Parker, a guy who had a lot of personal problems. What personal problems would Captain Marvel have? So I had this story, and I put that together with some other stuff and put together a 40-page magazine. And the very last days I was in the Army, we printed this thing on this printing press. And that was the start of Paragon Publications.
During a trip to Georgia, Bill drew inspiration for his publishing company.
Why was it called Paragon? Because Rebecca and I, on a weekend, we went out in the Georgia countryside, stopped at a restaurant that was called Paragon. Georgia is redneck as you can get, and this was very unusual. The decor of the place was kind of almost psychedelic, and they had very nice placemats, and the logo on the placemat was the word Paragon because it was the Paragon restaurant. So I stole the placemat, and remembering what Bill Colleen had taught me, I cut that out and pasted that up as the name of my fanzine. It was Paragon Golden Age Greats. And that was my, you know, on the name of my company and the first publication that I did.
His time in the Army concluded, Bill found himself looking for work in the civilian world.
Okay, good to his word. Once I got out of the Army, I was hired by Bill Parenti, and I did a few stories for Creepy and Eerie magazine, which gave me my in to professional world of comics. And it was good, but I was used to doing what I wrote, you know, and here I had to draw what somebody else wrote, and I didn't like that as much because I was not that disciplined an artist. And anyways, also I went to work for a film production company, another strange luck thing. I'm out of work, I have a wife, and you know, what are we going to do for a living? And a guy comes to the house to sell me an insurance policy, and I tell him my sad story. He says, "Hey, I know this guy that's starting a film production company down on Curran Drive in Orlando." And through that, I got a job, and I was working there as an illustrator.
While trying to have kids, Bill and his wife Rebecca discovered that adoption would be the best option for them.
We tried to have children and couldn't. We went to a doctor, and they gave us the tests, and it was determined that neither one of us could produce a child. We were living in Castleberry in Central Florida near Orlando at the time. And we got up with an adoption agency. I think I was working for a film production company at the time, or maybe I was unemployed. Rebecca had a really crappy job, low paying job in South Orlando. We didn't have much money. So I don't know if it cost money to adopt or not, but anyways, when we went over to look at the baby, that they decided this would be a good match for us. We drove over to Daytona. We put blankets in a cardboard box, okay? Put that in the back seat, and we go in, and, you know, I was all like, I don't know if I want any kids, you know, because it's going to really change our life and everything. Then I saw the baby and went, oh, we're taking this home, okay? So, it did, it changed everything. Anyways, we took her home in this cardboard box, and we tell Laura this now. That's my daughter, Laura. I named her Laura because I said, I was a really big Vincent Price fan, and I said, we're going to have to name our child after a character in a Vincent Price movie. And Rebecca said no to Ligeia, so we went for Laura, because he made Laura with Danny Andrews and Gene Tierney in the late 40s or early 40s. So she became Laura, and we put Laura in the cardboard box, stopped at McDonald's on the way back, and had lunch, and then home we went.
With little opportunity in the Orlando area, Rebecca got a job working for Florida State University, prompting them to move back to Tallahassee.
At that point in time, my wife had got a really crappy job working for a construction outfit in South Orlando. So we were living in Castleberry, and she was driving this enormous distance every day on I-4, which is a nightmare. She contacted people she knew at Florida State to see if there was a teaching position there. And the faculty. She was a graduate. She had a master's degree from Florida State in interior design, which is designing houses and living rooms and things of that nature. And the woman who, Dr. Weikal, who was in charge of that department, was thrilled to hear from her and sort of hired her on the spot. And so we knew if we went to Tallahassee that my wife would have a job, and she was an associate professor in that school. And she also manipulated her political ties to get me a job working as an illustrator at the media center there, where I also made films, and we did slideshows and did things for the president of the university.
While in Tallahassee, Bill began to work on his next film, Bloodsuckers from Outer Space.
While we were in Tallahassee, we again started making a movie called Bloodsuckers from Outer Space. I had become a fan of the old movie serials, and this was like taking my comic book character, the Shade and the girl from LSD, and doing what Republic Studios would have done with them when they adapted Captain Marvel in the 40s. In other words, just take the name and the costume and throw everything out the window. And we couldn't do flying scenes and all that because I'm shooting in 60 millimeters sound. So we just did practical effects. And I had these guys that were with the Florida State Flying Circus who were acrobats. And they did crazy stuff. We shot at a warehouse location. Again, guerrilla filmmaking. We didn't get anybody's permission to do this, so we just went down there and shot. It was a warehouse by the train depot. And the guys would be running away, and the Shade would be running up on this platform at the warehouse. And when they get to the end of the platform, he'd dive off and dive into these guys, and they'd go into a rough and tumble fight. Well, we didn't have any pads, or we didn't have any knee guards or anything. So, I mean, these guys just did it. And anything I'd asked them to do, they did. And we got some really amazing footage of this. And it was a great experience.
While working on art for a film company, Bill received an interesting postcard from Marvel Comics, asking him to join their team.
Also, while I was in Tallahassee, I got a letter from a postcard from Roy Thomas at Marvel Comics. He said, "Bill, don't you think it's time you started working as an inker for Marvel Comics?" And the day I got that, I had been working freelance for the guy I had worked with before in the film production company. He had given me lots of films to do the artwork for, and we were doing it through the mail. At this time, I had a large family room, and I had all these cells, we called them art cells, like animation cells, where I would draw a black outline on one side and paint it in on the backside in acrylics. I had like 50 or 60 of these in the room drying when I get this postcard from Roy. So I'm in the middle of this big project. So even though it sounds like a thing that would be at the top of anybody's bucket list, I was so busy. It was 2 weeks before I even responded to Roy about it. And but he did hire me, and I did ink some stuff in 1978 for Marvel Comics. I can't say that it was an enjoyable experience. I would have much rather have been working in the 60s, where I could ink Jack Kirby or Dick Ayers or any of those guys that were no longer working with the company in the late 70s.
Bill took the gig with Marvel, working on the What If comic book series.
Roy had me do books, obviously, under his auspices. And I did some issues of What If, which were like a double-sized book. So comics were only 17 pages back then, but the What Ifs were like 33 pages. So that was a good assignment to do that.
While working for Marvel, Bill continued working on his fanzine.
I also was doing my fanzines at that time. I had the first thing I did when I got out of the Army was also start up the fanzine. And I had those, we printed maybe 500 copies of that one with Captain Marvel when I was in the Army. And I sent this to a guy I knew, Marty Grime, who did another fanzine. He lived up in Boston. And he said, "Oh, you shouldn't release this because you'll get sued by Fawcett Publications because they didn't do comics anymore, but they're still in business, and they own the rights to Captain Marvel, we assume. And so probably you shouldn't do this." So I threw all those, I had to throw them in the trash, and I only kept a couple of copies of that. And but I converted Captain Marvel to Captain Paragon and created a character, Captain Paragon, which was the main hero in my Paragon Publications line. So I did Captain Paragon stories, and I did Paragon Illustrated and Paragon Presents and various titles with Paragon in, and I did Captain Paragon in his own book. And whereas other fanzine publishers, they did like one title and they did different subjects within the title, I wanted to be more like Marvel Comics, where I had a whole bunch of different titles. And as far as I know, I was the only guy that did that.
Eventually, Bill made his way back to Orlando and began doing artwork for a film company.
I moved back to Winter Park, and I worked for the guy who was sending me all this artwork to do through the mail. And we were making films at a clip. We were doing like 200 films a year. It was incredible. So he had a real system going for doing things on the cheap and very fast. Again, I got to work on my stuff because we usually didn't start till afternoon on that as well. So in the morning I could do the Paragon stuff, and then I shot for his stuff. He didn't care what I did as long as I got all the photography done and all the artwork done. And I got to hire other guys like, did you ever hear of Jerry Ordway? Okay, well, I hired Jerry and John Beatty and a couple other guys, Steve Vance in Tallahassee, to help me get all the artwork done. Because we were doing 200 films a year, and there are like 40 pieces of artwork in every film we did. So that's a lot of art. It might be something as simple as just press type on a cell, or it might be an illustration. So I did that from 78 into October of 82, when for political reasons, even though the company was making a good profit, they had to get rid of the guy who was over us in the head office up in North Carolina, and they had to close down the filmmaking end of it. So I was told literally days before that I was out of a job, and I was given, I think, 2 weeks salary above that.
With the fanzine doing extremely well, it was suggested to Bill that he take the next step in his publishing career.
Fortunately, the fanzines are doing very well. The fanzines were doing so well that we were selling, okay, let me say this. One fanzine I printed, I thought I was being selfish, so I should do something for my family. So I had a swimming pool put in the backyard for my family out of the money I made from just one fanzine. There was no distribution. Everything was sold piecemeal, one at a time through the mails. And I was selling in the thousands of these things. So I was also doing these while I was in Tallahassee, and brought it back down here to Florida, and to Central Florida, and continued that. And one of the printers that I was going to said, why don't you do a real comic book in color instead of these black and white fanzine things?
With the idea to turn his fanzines into actual comic books, Bill started AC Comics.
I started AC Comics in October 82, and we started actually producing the books by January 83.
With the printing press lined up, Bill got to work releasing the first issue of Americomics.
We would go and observe the printing and all that, and a lot of times when it would change to a printer in Sanford, the Sanford Herald printed my comics for several years, and I would just load my car up with the books and drive them back here to this office, and where we would assemble them and put them together ourselves at that point. Also at that time, the independent comics had just started, and people who did those were aware of my Paragon stuff. And David Scroggie, who was doing Pacific Comics, which was the very first independent comic company, he said, "Bill, why don't you do that?" And so I put those two things together, the local printer and the invitation from Scroggie, and I jumped into it, and we did initially Americomics, which I hated the name Americomics, so I changed it to AC Comics as soon as I could.
The first issues of the book were released with great success.
Okay, the first comics AC Comics published was a leftover from the Paragon. I had done a book called Fun Comics, and I had done 3 issues through Paragon. So I just took that material and we colored it and put that out as AC Comics' first book, which is Fun Comics number 4. And that had a Pat Broderick cover, and that was the first one, and it sold something like $28,000 copies.
Now running his own comic publishing company, Bill had to deal with the stress of being the only employee.
I was running AC Comics single-handed. I was doing everything myself, and I was really scrambling to get material together. And for the first time in my life, I was faced with having to put out more than one book at a time and on a monthly basis. I had to come out with 2 or 3 or 4 books a month. So I was scrambling. What do I do? What do I do? Well, I need a cover for this. When you go through Diamond or the distributors, you have to put your cover and your synopsis of the book out 4 months before the book comes out. And so this was the case back then. I had to have stuff that didn't even exist. I had to send them stuff, and then I had to make it exist by the time my 4 months was up. That was the situation I was in.
Still running AC by himself, all of his hard work was starting to pay off as an independent publisher.
And we met with amazing success right out of the gate. And what killed that for everybody was Marvel and DC. There were comic book stores throughout the country at that time, but Marvel and DC could not sell to the comic book stores. So that was kind of a conundrum there, where you had a store selling comic books, mostly back issues, but they couldn't handle the new stuff. So the independent market meant that now they would have new stuff, and they would have product for their stores. And of course, Marvel and DC weren't going to do this because it was an expensive process. And they wanted to see whether we were going to sink or swim before they got into it. So we were going full tilt, and we're being very successful, and a lot of other independent publishers sprung up. AC Comics is one of the first 5 independent publishers, and is the only of the 5 that still exist today. And literally hundreds of independent publishers have come and gone since 1982.
In order to make ends meet and keep AC going, Bill had to cut some deals with the printers.
I'm not a businessman. I have no business sense whatsoever. It was all set up on credit. You pay your rent every month on 30 days, so the world is set up to work on a 30-day cycle. So when you send a book to the distributor, you are paid by that distributor within 30 days. So I made the pitch to the printer that I can't pay you now, but I can pay you in 30 days. And my credit was good, so we lined it up like that. So I never really, like I said, I was working in film production, and suddenly that company went out of business, and I had 2 weeks' salary to live on, and I had to come up with something. So we did this, and I incorporated the material that I had at Paragon and turned it into a color process to do the color comic. And I did it all on credit. To this day, I've never invested any money into anything. We've been running for over 35 years on the basis of 30 days credit.
While still working solo, Bill was introduced to someone who would become an influential figure in AC Comics.
Between January '83 and 1990, I did it all myself. Mark Heike lived up north, and he corresponded with me because I did the Paragon Girl from LSD and Phantom Lady, Good Girl art stuff, and he drew good girls, and so he was sending me samples, and he did some work for me through the fanzines.
Mark Heike co-created FemForce with Bill, but was forced to drop out shortly thereafter.
Eventually, after we created FemForce and all that, he co-created FemForce with me. I wrote the story and created the characters, and Mark penciled the first issue and I inked it. And we're going on like that until he had some family problems and he had to drop out.
Finally, Mark made the decision to move to Florida and join AC Comics full-time.
By 1990, he had made up his mind that he would move to Florida and join me in AC Comics. And so he did. He came down, and he was initially rented a room from Rick Levins, who was living in Chuliota. Mark ran the front office, and I was in the back, and he was kind of the guy that answered the phone, and he was a buffer to keep people from bugging me. Because as you can imagine, we worked 24/7 pretty much every day of the year to put out the books. We worked all weekends, and we worked into the night because it's a tremendous amount of work, and there was only really two guys plus the artist. The artist, they did the drawings, okay, but Mark and I, we did the physical labor of putting the book together.
Eventually, DC and Marvel were able to get new product into comic book specialty stores.
Anyways, eventually Marvel and DC did go into it, and they did a special print run only for the comic book shop. And so now the comic book shop had not only product they could move, but they had popular product that they could move. They had Spider-Man and Batman and Superman. So that kind of put the kibosh on the independent stuff. And there was a big crash in 84, 85. So we had like almost one good year, and then the whole thing crashed. That's when everybody went into the black and white comics, because it was cheaper and you could survive. And how AC Comics survived for now 35 years, I guess just because Mark, Heike, and I are crazy, and we don't want to become accountants, right? So.
While initially focused on certain books, Bill soon discovered that all the titles he created were marketable.
I have a lot of number ones. If you don't go beyond number one, that means it didn't sell enough to go to a number two. And I hate this when people interview me. They say, why did you stop Captain Paragon after number 4? Well, hell, if it was successful, I'd be doing it now, So anyways, I know we have cataloged 130 different titles of AC Comics, and it's probably upwards of 150 or more now. It's only been in recent years that we've settled into a set number of books that we have carried on to go into the high number range.
Bill, knowing that a certain number of copies had to be sold in order to keep his comic enterprise afloat, had to find creative ways to keep his characters relevant and updated.
Tried to make a go of it with FemForce, and that has remained our most popular title for all these years. But every time we do a spinoff, try to put Night Vale in her own book or She Cat in her own book, that doesn't fly. And we can't figure that out. Also with the movies, when I make a Night Vale movie, you think the people that would buy the comic book would buy the movie, but they don't. And I have never yet to figure that out. But it's always I've bitten them off now, but the history of AC Comics is one of hanging by your fingernails for 30 years, for over 3 decades. So you have to sell a certain number of copies in order to remain with Diamond Distribution. And we managed to do that barely. And it's always, you never know when it's going to end. And I'm amazed. I mean, we have to make all the characters immortal. Because when we started this, I mean, I remember when we hit number 20 on FemForce. So, wow, my God, I've made it to number 20. Well, now they've been around for 30 years, and I mean, we got to have them immortal. And they're like, we actually killed off Joan Wayne because she was supposedly from World War II. And we got to the point where in her alter ego, she would be 90-something years old. So we had to have her die, and then she just became Miss Victory all the time. So she was an immortal from that point on. But these are things I never thought about when I started the company, that we'd have any sort of success with it.
During his time with Marvel, Bill came up with an exciting new concept that got shot down, but eventually gave birth to his greatest seller.
Okay, FemForce. When I was working at Marvel, and I did a book for Roy, What If the Avengers were formed in the 1950s? And this was fun for me because it had characters in the book that I got to ink that were characters I actually bought in the 50s that no longer existed, like Marvel Boy and Jana the Jungle and this kind of stuff. So anyways, he had in the book, he had Venus from the 50s, Jana the Jungle, Namora, which was Namor's cousin. And I approached Roy, I said, hey, what do you think about this? Why don't you do a book that's all female characters? You could put a Blonde Phantom and Namora, and take 1 or 2 of the Jungle Girls and Venus, and they had a Miss America. They had not very many, but they had a couple of Marvel female characters in the 40s, and put them together as a all-female team. And he said, nah, that wouldn't work. He said, female characters they don't sell. That's why we don't do very many female character books. And no, a team of females wouldn't work. So, okay. Time goes, I'm no longer with Marvel Comics, and I'm finding I'm really enjoyed drawing beautiful women and the sexy gal aspect of it, and most all of my characters are that. So I guess it was in Femzine #1, I did a story, I worked with Willie Blyberg, an artist on that, where I formed a group called Femforce 1, F-E-M-M-E, one word, Force 1, the numeral 1, or the All-Girl Squad. And I teamed up Phantom Lady, Sin, Blonde Bomber, and there was another one. There was 4 of them. Anyways, and that kind of caught on.
With Femforce as his best-selling title, Bill recounts how the first issue came to be.
When we went from Paragon to AC Comics, I went more mainstream with the subject matter. In other words, I went away from the sexy, busty girl stuff to what would be traditionally in comics at that time in 1982. Okay, now everything goes in comics today. I mean, comics are much more risque and lewd than anything I would have ever have considered it at any point in my life. So we started off AC Comics with Captain Paragon and the superhero stuff and all that. And we got to the point where the market had died down in 1984, and I was struggling for content, and I had material left over from the Paragon days, so we put out Femforce as a special, and to our surprise, it sold better than the other stuff that we were doing. So then we started, I guess, in 1985 with that as the main title, and all the other superhero guys who lost their own books, they became support characters in the Femforce title.
With an established publishing company, Bill was able to attract other artists to work on his books. Some of those have gone on to expand their careers and gain name recognition.
A lot of guys that went on to have good careers worked with AC Comics or got their first gig at AC Comics, like Eric Larson's probably the most notable of them. But I started AC Comics with Jimmy Sanders, a little guy, I think he was just in high school or just out of high school in Jacksonville. At the very beginning, he drew the story that I inked for what would be Fun Comics #4, the Captain Paragon story. And he went on to have a good career with Marvel. And of course, John Beatty, he was with me at age 17 and went on to do Secret Wars, Captain America, and the Nom. The guys I got from Charlton, Rick Levins, he had probably the longest stint on Captain America of any artist that ever worked on the feature. Mark Probst and John Dell, they're still working in the industry. Rick unfortunately passed away a few years ago. A lot of guys I knew or had access to that did covers, like Perez and Pat Broderick, Jerry Ordway, who I'd worked with in the fanzine stuff and for the film company. He and Mike Mocklin, they both went on working with Roy Thomas at DC on the Justice Society revivals. Mike's not doing anything anymore that I'm aware of, but of course Jerry's had a stellar career, and I think he ranks as one of the best artists in the whole history of comics. He's just a tremendous talent. And he did Star Films for me even back in the Paragon days. Perez, he did the cover to Americomics #1. And originally I was going to use a Steranko cover for that Jim had done for me for one of my Paragon books.
Over time, sales went down, and Bill got the call he was dreading.
There came a point when we got the executioner's axe call from Diamond that they were going to kick us off because we weren't selling enough. And we talked with, I talked on the phone with Bill Shanis, and he's another guy that goes all the way back to the fanzine days, and so he knows our history, and he felt really bad. I could hear it in his voice that he was giving the axe to the longest running independent comic company that was in existence at that time. And he made the suggestion that maybe we should concentrate on doing high price books. In other words, we know we weren't going to sell a lot of copies, but if we had a big dollar sign on it, we would make the diamond minimum. That's where we came up with the idea of doing a $10 FemForce and a $30 Men of Mystery and Crypto Horror. I mean, I never would have thought of doing that. But here we had the blessing of Diamond, and that's what they suggested that we do. And I never in a million years would have thought that that would have succeeded, but we've been doing this for many years.
Even so, much to Bill's surprise, the characters he has created have withstood the test of time.
I was amazed that that we were succeeding and it was going as long as it did. And I could see that I had something that was lasting. You know, these characters weren't a flash in the pan. I've seen so many of these other companies come and go and the characters forgotten about, you know, they had a year's existence or 2 years and then they're gone. But these characters are still existing and have gone on long, you know, after I would have thought we would have fallen by the wayside. So that was unusual, and that's sort of my legacy, that I'll be dead and gone, but hopefully maybe the Night Vale and these other characters will continue on after I'm gone. And it seems to be we're getting a lot of new people in doing it that like the characters, and so it could perpetuate after that, I hope.
Eventually, Bill would retire from AC Comics and turn the day-to-day operations over to Mark. Even though officially retired, Bill continues to work for the company he built.
Even though I'm retired, I have made a commitment to Mark Heike at AC to do the next 3 issues of FemForce. FemForce is going back to color. And so I'm writing and inking and doing some penciling, but lettering and coloring 3 issues of FemForce. And so here I've overcommitted again, but it's a challenge. There were certain things that needed to be done in these stories because going to color, we're going to a bigger audience and we're going to hit people that have never read the book before. So I have to work into the story who the characters are and demonstrate what their personalities are so that new readers can get in 3 issues an understanding of what, you know, what the characters are and decide if they want to continue to read the book. So we're hoping that it will be successful, but you know, you never know.
Also, in retirement, Bill finds time to pursue his other love, filmmaking.
I didn't have time to do the movies and the comics. So now that I'm retired from AC Comics, I spend my time doing this and also working the movies that I did in the 8mm days, like House at the End of the World. I really want to put that out on digital and you know, finally finish those movies I started 50 years ago.
Free from the handling of the day-to-day operations for AC, Bill was able to go back and finish the movie he had started years prior.
I took the 3 Nyoka chapters that John and I did. They were done as single standing serial episodes, and we started off with like chapter 5. We did chapter 5, 6, and 7 or whatever, something like that, like in the middle. So we never had a beginning and we never had an ending. So I went back and made a feature out of that. I put the 3 chapters together and shot 30 minutes of a new movie and called it Nyoka and the Lost Amulet of Voltura, and put all the elements in it, like who is the masked villain, and established characters that the audience had to guess who was the masked villain really, and that kind of stuff. And we had a lot of fun with that.
Looking back at one of his prior films, Bill decided to remake it using modern technology.
Then I also decided to remake one of my early movies, which was The Amazing Colossal Woman. And that was done on such primitive equipment and with primitive software that it was such an embarrassment to me. So I used all the green screen footage I had of the leading lady who we composited in to make her the giant woman, and shot a lot of new footage, mostly up in the land, and added a lot of new characters to flesh out the story. And we took a 25-minute movie and made it a 61-minute movie. And we had a lot of fun with that. And I got to meet a lot of new people working on that. And
Bill, on a roll with his filmmaking, decided to make a movie that relied less on special effects.
Then after that, I did Shadow Slayer, which I purposely designed as a vehicle for Brenna Berry, who worked years before on The Amazing Colossal Woman. and also as a movie that had very limited special effects, because Ghost of Garganta is taking forever to be finished because of the extensive, every scene in the movie is a special effect. And if you've worked in an editing program, you know that you have timelines. And when you put a special effect, you put a timeline on top of that, and a timeline on top of that. Well, in the Giant Woman thing, we might have as many as 9 timelines with all these things composited into one scene. This is very time consuming. The scene might last for 10 seconds, but it might take you a week to do it. You know, so Shadow Slayer was something I wanted to do where I thought I could put more time into the camera work and not be so rushed in filming it. And it was 100% a Bill Black thing. I wrote it and I directed it, and it was more the kind of a movie I wanted to do. Had nothing to do with comic books. It was just a straight out horror movie, but not a slasher type movie. But I was very pleased with the way that turned out.
Naturally, being in the comic and film business, Bill has attracted some fans over the years. The fans of his work are something that he embraces.
They mean quite a lot. I've been reading the book on James Warren, who did the creepy and eerie and famous monsters, and he hated fans. He said, "I don't want fans, I want readers," because it was all in the numbers, how many books you're going to sell. But it's a different story today because the industry is different. No one has the kind of circulation that they have now. And, you know, I guess some of the DC and Marvel books have a circulation of what the fanzines were back in the 70s. You know, so your bread and butter is the fans. And I never thought, I was like, we're talking about Bill Everett. I was a fan of Bill Everett. I was a fan of Sid Shores and Neil Adams and Steranko and all these guys, and Monty Hill and Roy Rogers and Charles Starrett. And I could see how paying attention to them in the later years of their life meant a lot to them. And now I'm experiencing the same thing now. And guys who bought my comics back in the 80s when they were kids, you know, now have grown up and had a family and had a job, and now they have disposable income, and now they're going back and collecting stuff, and they're you know, looking at my old fanzines and stuff like that. So, and I've become, you know, friends with a lot of the fans, and enjoy it. I have a really good relationship with like a half dozen fans, Eric Matthews and Mark Holmes and Jay Williams and Cliff Weikal, who has Cliff's Books in DeLand, Florida. All these guys, they're very supportive of me, and I really appreciate it.
Bill, now retired, can look back with fondness on his creations and the life that he has made for himself.
Starting AC Comics, that was a challenge, and that of course is my legacy. And then creating FemForce, I think, is the most important achievement of my life. And you know, one of your questions was, did you think it would last this long? No.
With his working days behind him, he is free to create his art, be it movies or drawing, on his own schedule, a luxury that he most certainly enjoys.
I've never been happier than when I'm doing my own thing. And like the Frank Sinatra song, I got to do my life, and I did it my way. And in fact, if I brought the lyrics to that song, and that can be my testament, I'll tell you, there's only one line in that whole song that I would change, and otherwise you could carbon copy it as you know, my testimony to my life. Working at Marvel was not a thrill. I would have hated to have drawn Spider-Man. Who would want to ink all those buildings and the spider web and all that, right? But, and you know, I was a fan of the Fantastic Four. I would have loved, killed to ink Jack Kirby on the Fantastic Four. That would have been a highlight of my life. But I think I'm far better off having done my own thing and created my own comics. So I'm glad I did what I did. We never made it big, but I got to do what I wanted to do, and I did it when I wanted to do it. And it's even better now that I'm retired because I don't have to face the monthly deadline.
At the end of the day, Bill is an artist at heart and loves to create.
I'm really enjoying getting back into drawing and experimenting and stopping when I want to stop. And with my family, I get interrupted every hour anyways. And with my heart problem, I fall asleep every hour anyways. I do what I want to do, and I do when I want to do it, and I can stop and start whenever I want to do it. And I have created a line of characters that I really have infused with what I believe is a life of their own, and they have their own personality and their own characteristics, and so it's easy to write them, and it's like I know them like they're my own daughters and sons and all that, and so I enjoy being with them when I'm drawing them and when I'm writing them. It's fun and it's a challenge. It's still a challenge.
Whether it be through his art, filmmaking, or just his personality, Bill brings joy to the people he reaches, and with a new movie in the can, he doesn't show any signs of slowing down.
I love doing movies, and I grew up on comics and movies starting when I was 6 years old. There wasn't a weekend in my life up until I got married that I didn't go to the movies on the weekend. And I bought every comic book I could get my hands on if it was a superhero or somebody had a mask. People think I like Westerns. Well, I like Westerns if it's the Lone Ranger or Black Rider, or Django Kid, somebody that's wearing a mask, then I like that. I have become a big Western fan. But I'm excited by all this, and I enjoy doing this. And now that I'm in retirement, I don't have to do it for a living. And that is like cutting the bonds that bind you. It's just, you're free to float and do whatever you want to do because I don't have to do it for the money. I am no kind of a businessman, but yet for whatever reason I ended up okay. I have systems in place that my family is taking care of. If I die tomorrow, they will be well off, okay? And that's good. So this is a type of freedom that I can really enjoy.
Bill continues to make movies, comics, and the time to go out to conventions and meet his fans.
When you're a creator, you have this urge, you just want to do it all the time. If you have the ability, and it doesn't matter whether anybody thinks you're any good or not, or whether you do have the ability, you have to do it. You have to create. I mean, there are a lot of terrible artists who became really big, like Grandma Moses. So you guys wouldn't know who that is, but this old lady painted so badly that it was good. And she became very wealthy doing the worst garbage you could imagine. But it's just something I'm compelled to do, and I will continue to do it till I drop. And I know it's my way, and that's what I got to do. I'm sticking to it. Okay.
Not bad for a guy who's had a little help from some strange luck.